This story is not my own, but it is my uncle's. My uncle lives in West Virginia, one of the more remote states in the eastern United States. While his main house is in a town, he also has a small cabin up in Spruce Knob, where he and my aunt would go during the summers. This cabin is very remote and accessed by jeep trails and isn't connected into the electrical grid. So, my aunt and uncle decided to take advantage of a 3-day weekend sometime in the late 80s and headed out to the cabin for some fly fishing and relaxation in the woods. When they arrived, my aunt went out to sketch some while my uncle unpacked and built a fire in the fireplace, as it was already getting dark. As night began to fall, my uncle noted how unusually quiet the woods were. He has been camping, canoeing, and backpacking all over the world, and he still says that this is the quietest he has ever heard of the woods. He and my aunt packed up everything and went to bed late. Sometime around midnight, my uncle awoke to a strange thumping and scratching noise coming from outside. He thought it was probably a bear or coyotes trying to get at the dog, and grabbed his .44 Marlin to go deal with it. As he pulled the gun out from its case, the door to the outside swung open, and a very large, hairy shape, vaguely humanoid, appeared silhouetted in the moonlight. He said he never quite got a good look at it, but the one thing he really remembers is the overpowering smell of stench and decay and 2 glowing, reddish-yellow eyes. He quickly emptied the .444, and while he didn't get a kill shot, he did scratch the beast's arm, which caused it to run, squealing into the woods. He and my aunt immediately grabbed their things, got into their Bronco, and hightailed it out of there. Whatever my uncle saw never really bothered them again, and when he returned in the morning with more people and firepower, he found little evidence of any intrusion, except for a single strange clawed footprint in front of the cabin, and claw marks on the door. I don't really know whether to believe my uncle or not, but this is unlike any story I have ever heard from anyone in my family, and he was completely serious when he told this one, and my aunt backed him up. This story has always deeply disturbed me, as I spend a lot of time in the woods. I'll be making a trip to their cabin this summer, so maybe I'll see the strange beast too.
My name is Lucas, and I'm 16. I live in Pennsylvania near the Appalachian Mountain Range. As a kid growing up, we would always go to my uncle's cabin in the mountains that we also hunted at. There's a long driveway leading up to the cabin, and a big parking area with a spotlight looking down on it. It was in late November, and the night before the first day of whitetail buck season, so we had our regular get-together at the cabin. There was a lot of drinking going on, so I kind of distanced myself from all of it and went outside to take a smoke break. As I walked outside, I will never forget the sound I heard. It was a mix between an animal in distress and almost a creepy laugh. I'm easily scared and quickly went back inside. After a while, the others went to sleep, and it was just me still awake. I suffer from insomnia, and my mind races all night. I was thinking about something random when all of a sudden I heard the same noise I had heard before and was very disturbed. I eventually fell asleep and woke up the next morning ready to go hunting. We got done and I had forgotten all about it. So night comes, and once again the older people I was with were slamming beers, so I just played on my phone. One of the guys eventually went out for a smoke break and didn't come back for a while, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. So my dad told me to go check on him. As I walked outside, I saw him, standing next to my dad's car, and yelled, "Hey, we were wondering where you went off to." But then I nearly shit a brick, as I heard a voice behind me say,
"Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking for my playing cards in my truck."
I turned around to see him walking towards me, and as I looked back at my dad's car, there was no one. I didn't want to look like an idiot in front of anyone else, so I mentioned it only to my dad. He told me I must have seen the shadow of a tree or something. He's a Christian and refuses to believe in that kind of thing. So the next morning, we hear a shot ring out, and come to find my uncle has shot a deer. We help him collect it and clean it, hang it up and butcher it. Then they all celebrated by drinking more beer, and I was once again left out. It was around 4 p.m. now, so we were about to eat the deer my uncle had shot, when my uncle said something. He said,
That's funny. I could have sworn I put the chops over the grill to cook.
but he shook it off as being a coyote or something. So we ate our supper, and once again, it was time for bed. Again, I couldn't sleep, so I sat up on my phone and played games. I forgot to mention that whenever my uncle shoots a deer, he throws all the guts into a pit we call the feeding trough, as there are a lot of coyotes in the area. Just a way of giving back to the wildlife, I guess. Anyway, I was laying up in bed when I heard that same noise again. It sounded farther away, and I wasn't worried about going and taking a look outside to maybe try and put an image to this creepy noise I was hearing. So I looked out the front door and I saw it. It was on all fours, eating guts out of the feeding trough. I thought it was a coyote at first, but it then stood up. It was looking straight at me. I couldn't see its face, but I could see shadows coming from the top of its head, which I perceived to be horns. I didn't move a muscle, afraid it would come charging at the door. It stared at the cabin for a good minute or so, just before vanishing. It didn't get down and trot off. It just disappeared. I told my dad what happened the next morning, and again he denied it being anything supernatural. Luckily, that was the last night I was staying there, and the next day I went online to try to figure out what the hell I saw. I guess it could have been a skinwalker or a wendigo, but I was never able to put a name to it. It still creeps me out to this day, and even though my uncle has sold that cabin since, I will never step foot in those mountains again.
My father, mother, and I make frequent trips to the Smoky Mountains and stay in the cabins they have near Pigeon Forge. However, this particular trip still haunts me to this day. About 8 years ago, we stayed in a cabin that had an alarm system. It was already dark outside when we reached the cabin and got settled in. We set the alarm and thought we should watch a movie together. While we were watching the movie, the security alarm system went off. The alarm was only supposed to go off if the door was open. We checked the cabin top and bottom, but we could find nothing out of the ordinary. The next morning, we called the company that rented the cabin to us to have them check out the alarm system. Someone came and checked out the system, and they said it's been called out to our cabin multiple times within the past month with the same problem. Since it's only the first day at the cabin, I am already feeling a little creeped out. I noticed that there's a book on the table that guests can sign and talk about how much they love the cabin. As I was reading more and more stories, I noticed that many of them mentioned feeling unsafe, and some even mentioned that they found wet footprints on the deck where the hot tub is. I told my family about these stories, and they told me they are just trying to tell scary stories and get our other guests spooked. I agree with her and go about our day. The same night, we go to bed like normal. My father slept in the basement of the cabin. I slept on the main floor beside the kitchen, and my mother slept on the top floor. My dad snores so loud that we all sleep far away from each other, including my mom. It was about 2 a.m. in the morning when I am woken up by the fridge door closing. I looked at the bright light from the fridge that was pouring into my room from the crack underneath my closed bedroom door. I noticed that light would come and go as the fridge door seemed to continue to open and close. I assumed it was one of my parents leaning on the fridge trying to decide what they wanted to eat for a late night snack. However, I felt weird and didn't even consider to get out of bed to join them on the snack. The fridge light disappeared slowly and I heard footsteps walk away from out of my room and to the direction of my mom's room. The footsteps seemed to stop for a second, then start the trip up the stairs. All of a sudden they stopped. I assumed that it was my mother and she made it to her room, so I fell back asleep. The next morning, I wake up and go directly to my mom and ask if she decided to eat a late night snack. She looked at me and asked, "What?" I told her that I thought she was at the fridge last night opening and closing the fridge because I heard her go back upstairs after a while, maybe around 2 a.m. She looked at me and said, "I thought that was you. At this time in my life, I was known to sleepwalk every now and then. I saw you standing at the top of the stairs last night around that time. I assumed you were sleepwalking because you looked at me and went back downstairs." So at this point, I started to freak out because I wasn't up at the top of the stairs. The rest of the trip, I slept with my mother on the very top floor. I didn't experience anything else the rest of the trip and never saw anything else, but I never went anywhere alone. A couple of months go by after our trip when my dad tells me he was looking to rent another cabin for a trip. We went to go look at the cabin that we rented the last time and found that cabin has been closed and is no longer available to rent. Out of curiosity, he did some research to find out that many guests experienced something in that cabin. The complaints ranged from feeling unsafe to people thinking someone was in the cabin that shouldn't have been, to people leaving before their vacation was over. I'm not sure what my mother and I had experienced that night at the cabin, but I now know that we aren't the only ones that went through something similar. My friends and I rented a cabin in the mountains in Puerto Rico. There was myself and another girl, Abby, then 4 guys, my brother Steve, Abby's brother Dave, and our 2 boyfriends Danny and Carl. The cabin belonged to a family friend of Carl's. So we arrived and everything is stocked up. Fridge is full and the cupboards are too. We straight away dump our stuff in the hallway, not even bothering to check the rooms and grab a beer. It had been a long trip and we wanted to relax and unwind first. We even started the fire. After dinner, we all went outside to look at the stars for some time. I seriously couldn't get over how clear and beautiful it was outside. It looked like we were the only cabin who was occupied. Through the tall trees we could see another cabin, but it didn't have their lights on, so it must have just been empty. We get back inside and open some more beer and start to play cards. We were all laughing and having a great time when Carl told us to be quiet and held his hand out. "Whatever, dude, no one likes a sore loser," Dave taunted. Carl responded that he's being serious and told us to be quiet again. We could hear what sounded like hooves on the roof. It sounded like someone was making a massive stride, walking back and forth. It must be some animal. With our cabin being the only one with heat and lights, maybe that has attracted some animals, I suggest while shrugging and sipping my beer. Abby shrieks, "Oh my god, what if it's a bear? Can a bear get up there?" And we all moan and roll our eyes. The guys are trying to act tough and said they will all go outside and try to scare whatever it is away. Abby and I are just left there warming ourselves by the fire. Not even 2 minutes later, they called us to come outside to show us that nothing was on the roof. We even stepped back a couple of feet to get clear view of the roof, and they were right. Nothing was on it. I laughed at Abby, saying that a flying bear was the culprit, and turned to go back inside. Danny stopped me by putting his hand above the door. "Danny, what the fuck?" He cut me off mid-sentence. He was standing with his arm above the door, staring into the trees. Everyone else was standing still, frozen, and looking in the direction that Danny was. I followed his gaze. In the tree, right near the clearing of the cabin, I could make out 2 men? They looked like they had hooves on their lower feet, and they were squatting, holding onto the branches. I thought this was the way the trees were designed at first. It was very, very dark, and our eyes were playing tricks on us, and seeing things that aren't really there. I focused in on them again. The one closest to us moved its arm to get a better grip on the branch above its head, and they continued to stare at us. We were all running inside the cabin in a matter of seconds. We double-locked the door and even pushed the bookshelves and sofa up against it. I quickly turned the only light we had on off, and the warm glow of the fire reflecting our terrified faces. We sat by it and discussed exactly what everyone saw. We all described the same beings. We honestly had beer, vodka, and took to eating breakfast cereal out of the box as we were too scared to head to bed just yet with those things outside. Thank God we didn't open it earlier in the day. We listened to the scratching banging on the front door for most of the night. The scratching echoed from the kitchen and the hallway, then immediately would start at the front door straight after. The sounds on the roof came back too. I don't think anyone slept that night. In the morning, we all got the hell out of there. We took to staying in a really shitty run-down 2-star motel, but anything was better than that cabin. So 4 years ago, my friends invited me to stay at their cabin in Tahoe. I didn't really know them very well, so I asked if I could bring my best friend Mark along. It wasn't a very long road trip. It was something like 3 hours or so not that bad. The cabin was this old 4-story cabin, including basement and loft, with another smaller cabin in the backyard, which had 2 stories. When you stand in front of the cabin, you walk up along a flight of stairs, and in front you will see a door. To the left is another pair of stairs that goes to a sliding door, and to the right is this path to the backyard. Once you go through the door, to your left is a door to the basement, and in front of you is the stairs that curves to the left and up to the 2nd story. There to your left is a bedroom, and to your right is a hot tub and laundry room / water heater. And in front of you is another flight of stairs that goes up, and to the left again, you will get up to the living room, and to the left is the kitchen of that. Halfway to the kitchen, to the left of that is the stairs to the loft, where we slept. Now on to the story. First night I asked my friend Jake, who invited me, "Dude, this cabin is freaking scary. What if this place is haunted or something?" He replied with, "I'm pretty sure it's not. No one's ever died in it, and my grandpa, who built it, doesn't have any record of any deaths or anything like that." Something in that conversation must have triggered something, cause I wouldn't be sharing this story if I hadn't. Fast forward to the next day, before breakfast. Everyone decided to go to the other cabin. Let me give you the layout before I go on. If you're facing the cabin on the ground, there is a storage area right in front of you. To the left is a flight of stairs you go up those, to the right is another flight which finishes the walk to the cabin. At the end of those stairs is a deck to then the cabin. The cabin has 5 rooms and a balcony on the 2nd story. If you walk in, there is the entryway. The next room is emptiness with stairs. To the left you go up to that, and if you go to the front there are 2 small rooms. To the left and right, and up the stairs is a big space, and then to the right of the stairs about 12 feet away is the door to the balcony. Now that's pretty much the reason we were up there, was for a tour. Fast forward to breakfast. Mark and I finished early, washed our plates, and grabbed the keys for the 2nd cabin, and went up and waited for everyone else to finish. We walked up the stairs to the cabin, and Mark unlocked the door, and we walked in. Once we got on the floor, we noticed that the window has left open. Mark went and shut it, and went to the balcony straight across from the window, and closed the door behind us. We just sat there for 15 minutes, just talking, when we got bored and realized they weren't coming. We turned around and tried the door. It was locked from the inside. Now, we thought this was a self-locked door, so we thought we were idiots for closing it. So it was just us, locked out, freaking out, and we forgot about the keys in Mark's pockets. Then we were suddenly of the realization of the keys. Mark took the key, unlocked the door, and we saw the window. The window was open again, but we just shrugged it off as us being forgetful. I closed the window, and we started for the cabin. 4 steps down from the outside stairs, we realized we left the door open. Well, I left the door open. I went to go close the door and I heard it. Footsteps on the upper level. I ran back to Mark and pushed him down the stairs. I told him, "Someone's in the cabin." Those 4 words made us run fast as our little legs could. We got back to the 1st cabin and told everyone that we went back to the 2nd cabin with knives and suggest that we go find who was in there. I yelled into the still open door, "If anyone is in here, come out. We have weapons." No answer. We ran into the cabin and did a complete sweep of the 1st floor and found nothing. I led everyone up the stairs and we found nothing but an open window. Fast forward to night. We kept that in the back of our minds, thinking about it occasionally. Right before dinner, we made up this game plan where we were gonna go put our freaking sheets over our heads and hide to scare the ghost hunters who were coming down to the second-story bedroom and find the ghost without getting caught. It was my turn to be the ghost, so I went down to find a hiding spot. When I saw it, floating or gliding past a window that no person could reach without being at least 20 feet tall, a pale white face. It went in front of the window, just minding its own business. Now, this game turned into the ghost finding to the ghost hunters. I ran up the stairs from the living room. When I put a pillow thrown by one of my other friends, it hit a chandelier and made us end the game early. After dinner, we were getting for bed. I told Mark what happened, and we said we wouldn't tell anyone till we were older. That night, I woke up at 3 a.m., but little did I know, Mark did as well. Going up the stairs to the loft was a shadow. I don't know how to describe it. It was blacker than black, like a solid black mass, just walking up the stairs. That morning I told Mark about the incident, and what he said made me feel less crazy. He said, yeah, at like 3 a.m. I heard someone walking up the stairs. Then I just fell asleep thinking it was one of you guys. That was the day we left. Now I only went there one more time after that incident, and never had an experience like that ever again. I was up near Antelope Lake, California, exploring this old mining town known as Lucky S, with my girlfriend and her parents. So there were only 4 of us total. Lucky S is out in the middle of nowhere on this seemingly endless fire road. Then it just appears from the forest and you suddenly find yourself between at least 4 cabins in different stages of collapsing. When we got there, it was in the middle of the day, no later than 2 p.m. with clear skies. Knowing I was going into the buildings that may or may not be haunted, I wanted to capture anything and everything I could, so I brought my Nikon to take a few pictures and strapped a GoPro Hero 4 on my head to shoot 4K video. Little did I know, this would pay off within the next hour. We explored 4 or 5 cabins, ate some food, and then walked about a quarter mile further up the road to the second half of this rundown town. While my girlfriend's dad was examining some old piece of large machinery and explaining how it used to work, I walked off alone to check out the next cabin. There were no steps leading up to this one, so the easiest way to inside of the structure was to either get a running start or jump in or pull yourself up by grabbing onto either side of the doorway. I elected for the run and jump version and totally ripped my shorts down the leg. My favorite shorts. Anyway, I'm in this rundown cabin, and I take a shot of my girlfriend and her parents outside of the other building. I turn and take shots of the holes in the roof and of the cabin that I'm in. Then I hear an odd noise, like one of them is shuffling debris just outside the doorway. So, I stop and stand still, listening. Then I hear an obviously loud knock coming from the doorway. I'm like, what? So I quickly turn around and see all 3 of the people I'm with still outside the structure across the way. So I turn back towards the other end of the cabin and just stare towards the doorway. Seconds later, there's more shuffling, followed by 3 obvious footsteps. The first one is the loudest, I think, because of how you have to enter the building. You can't just step in. You have to either pull yourself up or jump, so there's always quite a bit of noise. So these 3 footsteps sound like they walk right towards me and then stop. I stand there for a few more seconds, and then slowly walk towards the doorway. After that, I never heard anything again. It was my first and only experience like this. I wasn't alone and it was in the middle of the day. It was outside and it was very sunny and bright out. So I guess it was like the least scary way to experience this. My grandparents used to live in the Ozarks in a tiny house in the woods. I loved it there. Being from West Texas, it was always nice to resort to a place with trees. After a year or 2 of living in the house, my grandparents decided to renovate to make it look more like a logged cabin. I had always felt something really unsettling about the house, and warned them to be careful because renovating the house can stir up unpleased spirits. They went ahead with the renovations. Gorgeous woodwork on the house with 2 gorgeous decks looking out to the mountains, and an entire new living area in the basement. It was gorgeous and I was very excited to stay in where we were that whole summer. When I arrived, the atmosphere was tense. It felt angry, even though my grandparents were always very welcoming. It was quite strange. I got an official tour and for the most part the interior was the same. Then we went to the basement. I was overwhelmed with fear. I was hesitant to go down alone, and when I would, I could never stay for long. I always slept upstairs and never felt safe down there. One day, I was making my way down the stairs to get some laundry which was located across from the basement. I had only taken about 3 steps down when I suddenly felt cold and couldn't move. I felt petrified. It wasn't too long before I felt a force on my back, and the next thing I knew I was sliding down the stairs. Still so petrified that I couldn't even scream. It was a silent fall. When I could move again, I rushed for my clothes and ran back up the stairs and didn't go back down for a few days. A week or so went by. It was July 3rd and it was storming all day, but it was pretty warm outside. My grandparents had left for a party down the street and I had decided to stay out and hold the fort, all alone by myself. I was upstairs in the big open loft on their computer, just killing some time. It was still storming outside, and it was the last moments of daylight. I was listening to music with my headphones over my head, browsing YouTube and the likes. I felt a familiar cold breeze, but instead of my entire body, it was just my neck. And instead of being extended cold, it was brief, as if someone was blowing on it. I was not moving. I was too scared to even breathe, and as I stated, I was still, with my headphones on. They flew off my head with such force and hit my computer screen in front of me. I screamed, I ran, I panicked. I tried turning on the TV, but all it was doing this really loud, startling static. It's the only way I can explain it. I tried turning it off, but it wouldn't. I tried to calm my nerves, and I looked at the painting of a meadow my grandparents had hanging by the TV. And then I saw it. I saw a man with the most sinister evil face I'd ever seen, with empty white eyes that I still feel so much fear. I ran outside into the rain, shoeless and terrified. I walked to the house where my grandparents were, never explaining what happened. So this happened when me and my family were on vacation in Pigeon Forge in Gatlinburg. I was in high school at the time. We stayed in a 2-story, 2-bedroom cabin in the mountainous wooded area. On the trip were me, my parents, my sister, and my grandfather, who was recently diagnosed with dementia. The upstairs part of the cabin contained a bedroom and a kitchen and living room, with narrow stairs leading down to a room with a pool table and a couch, and then the master bedroom. My parents slept in the master bedroom, of course. I slept on the couch, in the living room, and on the master bedroom was my grandfather. I'm laying on the couch. Everyone else is asleep. I'm playing my Game Boy, which has the volume turned all the way down, when I start hearing mumbling come from across the room. My parents' door is open, so I just brush it off as sound bouncing off the wall and not mention it to anyone. The next night, I again hear the mumbling, so I walk into my parents' bedroom and both are just watching TV. I ask what they were talking about, to which they replying they weren't talking. They just were watching Family Guy when it happened, so it wasn't like I was hearing the TV. So I go back in and sit down, and I hear a pool ball roll across the table. I'm pretty scared, but you know I'm a man, so I don't let nothing bother me, and eventually fall asleep. The next night, the same thing happens, only a lot more frequently. The last night there, I'm getting used to hearing the noises and pool balls moving, when all of a sudden, I hear one of the pool sticks slam onto the ground, which it was currently laying flat on the center of the table. Then I see this, what I guess is a see-through shadow, pass in front of the opening in front of my mom and dad's bedroom. Then I feel this ice-cold, tingly feeling that I really don't know how to describe. It was on my ankle. It was some sort of sensation. I felt like someone was grabbing my ankle. I noped right off that couch and into my parents' bed. My mom immediately says, "You saw the shadow too then?" I was like, "Yeah." and I've been hearing all this other stuff. My sister then runs down the stairs because she gets awakened by my commotion. I tell Dad to cut off the TV and we all hear mumbling and pool balls rolling. Mom goes back downstairs with my dad to check if my grandpa is talking. While he has gone to continue, we hear the mumblings. Dad gets back and says he's sound asleep. For anyone who wants to visit the cabin, I would be very careful. When I was younger, 11 or 12, I was in Boy Scouts and signed up for the Klondike Derby and had to go to a training run through the weekend before. We were supposed to bring one parent, so obviously I chose my father. Everyone else did as well. The first night, after everyone had fallen asleep, I sat right up in my bunk. I was on the top bunk with my father on the bunk beneath me. After sitting still for a minute, I turned around at the end of the farthest table in the cabin. Picture a long cabin with bunks on each side and tables in the middle, maybe 3 or 4. I saw a man sitting. I asked him why he was awake and he didn't respond. I got a bed and slowly, as not to wake anyone, and went over to see if he fell asleep sitting up. When I arrived and tugged his shoulder, he just vanished. I turned around to face my bunk and there he was, standing still directly beside my bunk. I ran over and hopped into bed as fast as humanly possible. How absurd, right? Run towards the man. Upon getting in my bed, I vomited over the edge about 3 or 4 times, wiped my mouth, and then fell back asleep. When I was awoken by my father the next morning, he said he wanted to make some breakfast with me before anyone got up so we could fill up. I asked him if he was the one who cleaned up my throw up and he told me he didn't see any when we came in, when he got up to sleep in his truck because of some guy snoring. To this day, I still don't get it. The man clearly had a beard and black coat on and a hat on. I'll never forget it. So my family owns a cabin on a small lake up in New Hampshire. We go up there every summer. It's basically our home away from home. There are other houses on the lake, quite a few near us, but beyond that it's pretty rural. Miles of woods stretch beyond the lake houses, so there's really no reason to be in an area unless you were hunting, own a lake house, or visiting the lake for whatever reason. So one night, maybe 6 years ago, it was late, probably around midnight. My ex and I were laying in bed just chatting about whatever. All of a sudden, we hear footsteps outside the open window. The window lays only about halfway up the wall to the side of the bed, and is situated so that it opens right up to the bottom of the bed where our feet are. The ground by my house is covered in a layer of pine needles that drop from above, so it's pretty hard to walk quietly, but the footsteps sounded like whatever was making them were trying their best not to be heard. They sound relatively close, but were rationalized by ourselves that they probably were just some sort of animal. A couple of minutes go by and we hear them again, except this time they seem closer. They seem to be right outside the window, still trying to move quietly. At this point, the two of us are starting to get a little freaked out. To our mutual horror, we look down and see a hand slowly coming through the window. Obviously, we scream and wake the house up, and my parents come running through the adjacent room. We tell them what happened, and my father rationalizes it as the event of being a figment of our imaginations. To this day, I don't know if he's right. The weird thing is that both me and my ex saw the same thing, so how could it be our imaginations? To this day, I feel uneasy staying in that room, and I always make sure to shut the window before I go to bed.